Okay, chapter 19, Giacomo Puccini. This is page 340. All right, so Puccini lived from 1858, died in 1924. And he, just like the two composers we just looked at, has written some of the best loved operas that, again, are still premiered and performed a good bit today. He comes from a family of composers and musicians. So following that family trade idea once again, he was born in Lucca, Italy, and he studied at the Milan Conservatory, so again, northern Italy. I actually got to go to Lucca, Italy back in my college days, so there's little baby me. Aren't I adorable? They have a Puccini museum at the house where he was born. This is one of the original production costumes from his opera Turandot. And here is a statue of him. Okay, so he did study at the Milan Conservatory, like I just said, and he lived a bohemian lifestyle while in college. And that is a nice way to say that he was broke, like super broke. He had several roommates, and they sweet-talked their way probably through paying rent payments. So they got away with a lot of stuff that really they shouldn't have. But he wrote his first opera while still in college, and that gave him enough success. It wasn't like this huge, amazing piece. It's not even super performed today. But it gave him enough success that two good things came out of this. First off, commissions. People hired him to write music for them. And secondly, he had an annual income from the Ricordi publisher. So he signed a deal with Ricordi. Ricordi Publishing is one of the I guess you could say the big names in music publishing still today, and definitely back then. So that is a great deal for Puccini. Some of his famous operas. He became famous after Manon Lescaut, written in 1893, but he earned world recognition after 1896 with La Bohème. We will look at that in just a second. Tosca. This comes from Tosca. This is an opera singer who is getting blackmailed by this dude, and yes, she is trying to kill him. Madame Butterfly and Turandot. Madame Butterfly takes place in Japan, Turandot takes place in China. Okay, so this is from Turandot. His musical style. He wants to bring a lasting appeal to his music, and he has a good sense of theater, which helps bring that about. Mozart we also described as having a good sense of theater. They just know what works and what doesn't on stage. His melodies are going to be pretty short. However, they're easy to remember and super emotional. Probably some of the most emotional music within an opera that we've looked at so far. The orchestra, instead of playing something to support the melody, so you'll have the orchestra and then the melody on top, the melody and the orchestra work together. And that's, one, it revs up the emotional quality, but two, it suggests the mood a little bit better. And Puccini often minimized the difference between the aria and the recitativo, so he's trying to make that as seamless as possible, and so it reads as a little bit more realistic. The libretti for his operas, so the text for the operas are going to be high quality. He wants something that's not trite, not something that we've heard before. And a lot of the times his operas fall into the verismo category. Verismo is talking about realism or what is true to life. Now that does not mean that these operas necessarily are realistic. They just have elements that are realistic, things that we as regular individuals can, I guess, understand and relate to. And some of his music is falling into the category of exoticism, such as Madame Butterfly and Turandot. So we are going to look at La Bohème. You have information about this starting on 341. The listening guide is on page 343. So La Bohème was written in 1896, and it translates to the Bohemian life. This is set in, like, basically a few decades before this premiered. So it premiered in 1896, but it's set in like 1830s Paris. You have several characters involved. They're all friends. You have Rodolfo, who is one of your main characters, Marcello, Colline, Schaunard. They are all friends and roommates, and they are all broke. And they're all very artistic people. Rodolfo meets Mimi, so boy meets girl, and sadly girl is also broke, but worse than that, she has tuberculosis, which is kind of a death sentence at this point. So it's really sad. Boy meets girl, girl has tuberculosis, girl dies. And that's the overarching element of verismo. So again, something that is realistic. People get ill and they die, particularly in 1830. But there are other elements of verismo that we can find in the example that I'm about to show you. But because this whole bohemian lifestyle, several friends who are roommates and they're all artistic and they're all broke, that reflects some of his early years as a student. Now, nothing so dramatic as boy meets girl, girl dies happened in his youth, but there is that small element of what is realistic. Okay, so you have an excerpt from Act 1. You have a link in your playlist, basically. And I can, in a listening discussion that I'll have for you, I'll have what exactly you need to listen for. And in your the list for the listening questions on your test, there is one aria that you're going to listen for. It is called Che gelida manina. That is the potential listening question. It is linked in that chart in your listening module under Content in Brightspace, so make sure you watch that. Okay, looking at the next chapter. This is page 350, looking at Richard Wagner. I just call him Richard. This is chapter 20. So Wagner lived from 1813 and died in 1883. He has a huge impact on the 19th century culture, so the 1800s culture, and we're still feeling the effects of Wagner. He was influential to a lot of people, not just musicians, but other artistic people. And he was definitely an egotistical individual. He built an opera house specifically for his music. How ridiculous is that? He built his own opera house because other opera houses weren't good enough. And he built this in Bayreuth and is called the Bayreuth Opera House. Looking at his early life, he was born in Leipzig to a very theatrical family. And he wanted to be a playwright when he was little, until he was about a teenager and he heard some of Beethoven's music. This was a big change for him. Afterwards, he was like, nope, giving up theater, going into music. So he, oddly enough, never mastered a musical instrument, even though he was very good at music theory. So he's more cognitive than practical application. At the Leipzig University, he was an absolutely horrible student. He would fight, drink, gamble. He was literally always in debt. He mooched off of everyone. And even his family thought he was good for nothing. How sorry do you have to be when your family thinks you're good for nothing? So looking at his life and career, his first wife, Minna Planner, she was an actress. And in 1839, the two snuck across the border to France. And he wound up in debtor's prison, which is so sad, but so characteristic of him. By the end of this, you will understand, yes, this man was literally always in debt. In 1842, when he was in Dresden, his opera Rienzi, this is his first big success, Rienzi. Afterwards, he was appointed the conductor for the Dresden Opera for about 6 years, but he fell into debt so badly that he had to leave the country. He wound up with about 10 times his annual income worth of debt. So he ran away to Switzerland to avoid those debts. And he was planning several works at this point, one of which, the Ring Cycle. We'll talk a good bit about the Ring Cycle in a little bit. He also wrote theories and essays. The Ring Cycle, so brief little introduction. It is a cycle of 4 different operas. So 1, 2, 3, 4. They go in order. They're kind of like a opera series, if you will, telling a big story. And they're all based off of Nordic myth. He also started to work on his opera Tristan and Isolde, which is, again, one of his most famous operas. But we will not talk about that right now. So after Tristan and Isolde, surprise, surprise, he had money troubles. His operas Tannhäuser and Tristan and Isolde, which are very famous now, were not doing well. People just didn't get it. They thought his music was too long, too weird, just too much. People still have that impression about Wagner. In 1864, he was kind of rescued by King Ludwig of Bavaria, this 18-year-old king, more or less, huge fan of Wagner's music, and basically bailed him out of debt. At this time, Wagner also fell in love with Cosima von Bülow, who was the wife of his friend and fellow conductor Hans von Bülow. So that's messy. While Cosima was still married to Mr. Bülow, she had two of Wagner's children. And after Wagner's first wife died, Minna died, he eventually gets to marry Cosima. And you may remember this picture. Cosima is Liszt's daughter. So it's kind of very strange. And what's even weirder is Hans von Bülow. His friendship with Wagner didn't go sour after this. And I'm just like, wow, that's a lot. That is a lot. That is soap opera worthy. But looking at Wagner's impact on the musical world, as a person, this gets ugly, sorry. He was definitely a musical genius. Nobody discredits that he was selfish and egotistical. By this point, I think you understand that. But he was also a huge German nationalist. So not only did he want to promote the German figure, promote German music, and he wanted the German nation to become stronger. A lot of people did. But he did this to the point where he wanted to exclude anyone who was not German, especially people who were Jewish. Wagner actually had a lot of issue with the composer Mendelssohn because Mendelssohn was Jewish. And it made absolutely no sense and was completely horrible and just cruel. So Wagner, as a person, is terrible. We're just going to go ahead and say that. But as a musician, he was really brilliant. So he's a figure that a lot of musicians love to hate. I think that's a general way to say it. A quote from Wagner, he says, "I am the most German of beings. I am the German spirit." He's ridiculous. I think you kind of get this by now, but he's absolutely ridiculous. His music drama. So he didn't just call his operas opera. He thought they were more than opera. They were music dramas. They were a step up. His Ring Cycle, he finished that in 1876. And a lot of critics, and some people still today, consider his music too heavy, dissonant, and too long. Like his operas would be at least 5 hours long and intense. His very last opera was Parsifal, and he died at age 69 in Venice. Looking at Wagner's music, so it starts on page 351, goes on to the next page. He wanted opera, or the opera house, especially his opera house, to be a place where the spectator would be overwhelmed by music and drama, an experience unlike any other. With that, he wrote his own libretti because he was a control freak. He did not want any aspect of the dramatic or the theatrical realm outside of his control. A lot of his operas, particularly the Ring Cycle, are going to be based on medieval Germanic legends and myths. You're getting, again, the German influence. And his characters are going to be larger than life, so a lot of gods, heroes, etc. And he called his works music dramas. Now, I want you to remember music dramas, and sometimes called them universal artwork, because he's taking artistic realms from all over the spectrum. So art, music, drama, literature, pushing that all together into one big concept. And he called this Gesamtkunstwerk, which is the universal artwork. You don't have to remember the German. That's just what he called it. This is what it translates to. So a typical Wagnerian opera. He's going to focus a lot on continuous flow rather than a recitativo, an aria, or an ensemble section. He's going to, again, try to make that seamless. We've seen this with several opera composers already. He wants to shift the focus from to the orchestra rather than focus on the voices. So that's kind of backwards from a lot of operas that, actually any opera, you don't usually focus on the orchestra, you're usually focusing on the people on stage. Not so with Wagner. His orchestras are so powerful that you need to have one of the largest voices available, because only those voices can basically go over that volume level. He loves lots of brass, which is why this orchestra is so powerful. And with the large voice categories, you have the birth of the Wagnerian soprano and the heroic tenor types. Those are two different voice types that we specifically recognize to fit well with Wagner's music. In his operas, he's usually going to incorporate a leitmotif. This is a short musical idea associated with a person, object, or a thought. So it's a theme, but it represents something. It's not too different from the idée fixe, except it's not as repetitive. It will appear multiple times, but for a specific reason. And his music overall is going to be chromatic and dissonant. You're going to have lots of crunchy sounds, which will eventually, he uses them so much that it breaks down tonality. This idea of the breakdown of tonality in the 20th century, this actually leads to a lot of the craziness we're going to see in the 1900s. So this last point, all of these blue things are important, but the last point is going to help us as we go into the next unit. The best example of this breakdown of tonality comes from his opera Tristan and Isolde, which is one of the reasons it's so famous. But what Tristan and Isolde did, he started the opera with a particular chord, and it was very dissonant, and you wanted it to resolve, but he didn't let it resolve. He kept building that momentum, that tension, until 5 hours later when you get to the end, and then finally that chord resolves. That is the breakdown of tonality that we're talking about. It's different from what we've seen in any other composer up to this point. So we talked about how Wagner impacted society in the 19th century, but we're still feeling a lot of his impacts today. In some ways, he inspired people, the movie theater design. His dramatic music is easily recognized. You may have heard some of his music on even Bugs Bunny or other cartoons in your childhood. And he even inspires a lot of epic soundtracks for movies or TV. So this is a picture of his opera house at Bayreuth. As you can see, everything is focused, the attention is focused on the stage. In older designs for opera houses, here at the wings, the sides of the opera house, there would be boxes where you could rent a box and basically watch the opera from there. But here there are only boxes here at the back where you have a good view of the stage. Especially in like the 1700s, but with in the 1800s as well, people went to the opera not just to watch a show, but they also went to the opera to go see their friends and hang out. So it was a bit of a social interaction as well. He didn't want that. He wanted, again, all of the attention on the stage. So he's getting rid of some of that social interaction. This is a blueprint of Bayreuth. This is the audience hall. This is the stage. This is the extra stage where you can put the scenery in the background. Here are wings where you can get ready and hold the whole cast. And over here is the orchestra pit. So as you've probably realized, the stage and the extra stage, should you run out of stage, are as big as the auditorium. So that's kind of crazy. The orchestra pit was actually designed really cool. It kind of goes down into this tunnel, and the softer instruments are up close to the top, and then the louder instruments are down here at the bottom. And then there's this little lip here. The lip will hide the orchestra from the view of the audience, so they're not distracted. But it will also allow the sound to bounce off this back wall, go up and hit this lip, and then bounce back onto the stage. Because again, that stage is huge. It's going to be hard to hear the orchestra, but this gives the people on stage a fighting chance. And then looking again at the impact of Wagner, Not only just like being based off of the concept of mythology, but even just the way the soundtracks were written for Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, they're all based off of kind of what Wagner did, his style of writing. You have leitmotifs or themes that go with specific ideas. So if we take Star Wars, for example, if you hear da 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 da, you hear that and you immediately start thinking Darth Vader. You know Darth Vader is going to be mentioned, or you're going to see Darth Vader somewhere on screen. And that's a good example of a leitmotif. That is a musical theme that we, the audience, are supposed to associate with a character or an idea. Lord of the Rings does something very similar, even though there are two different composers. All right, so finally, looking at music, woohoo! We're going to look at an excerpt of Die Valkyrie, or The Valkyrie, written in 1856. This is part of the Ring cycle, so that's set of 4 different operas. This is opera number 2 out of all 4. If you want the full name of the opera cycle, it is Der Ring des Nibelungen, or The Ring of the Nibelung. And this is still widely performed just because the concept is just like, whoa, really interesting. The whole song, I keep calling it a song cycle. It is an opera cycle, reflects Wagner's view of 19th century society, and it's pretty funny and hypocritical. He warns that the lust for money and power destroys society. This from a man who was literally always in debt. Kind of funny. Again, the storyline is based off of Nordic mythology, which is why it's really weird. So, up until the point that you're going to watch for class. So previously in the Ring cycle, just to get you up to speed with how weird this is. You have a dwarf, Alberic, who has stolen gold that belongs to the Rhine Maidens. And Rhine Maidens are basically mermaids that live in the Rhine River. Alberic then makes a ring from the Rhine gold, and it can give immense power to anyone who wears it so long as he or she renounces love. The king of the gods, named Wotan, then steals the ring, but loses it as well, so he's clumsy. In fear that Alberic will get the ring back and get revenge, Wotan places the Valkyries, his warrior daughters, around Valhalla, which is his castle. Brunhilde is Wotan's favorite daughter, and she is the leader of the Valkyries. Wotan wants to create a hero who can help him regain the ring, so he takes a human wife and fathers the Volsung twins, who are Siegmund and Sieglinde. They don't know that they're half gods, but they are separated as children. So that's, side note, that's very similar to what you have in Star Wars with Luke and Leia. Sieglinde marries Hunding, and Siegmund becomes an outlaw. Wotan gives Hunding a magic sword as a wedding gift. He just appears at the wedding and thrusts it into a tree that happens to be in their living room. We don't ask questions. The sword belongs to whomever can draw it out, but nobody can. And that kind of reminds you of Arthurian legend, like the sword and the stone. So, getting into this opera, Siegmund, who is traveling under the name of Woeful, takes refuge in Sieglinde and Hunding's house, and the two fall in love. So Sieglinde and Siegmund fall in love. Hunding allows Siegmund to stay the night, but demands a duel in the morning. Sieglinde gives Hunding a sleeping potion, giving her and Siegmund time to talk, and this is where we pick up with the story. And I'll go ahead and spoil it for you because I think you kind of need this. In Star Wars, Luke and Leia, they meet. They're twins separated at birth, so they don't know that they're siblings. They meet, they kind of develop a crush on each other, but then they figure out that they're siblings and they're like, nope, not going there. In this ring cycle, you have something similar but different. Siegmund and Sieglinde, they are twins separated at birth. They meet, they don't know that they're siblings, but when they do figure it out, they don't care and continue dating more or less, and it's weird. There is no other way to say it. It's weird. It's mythology. You do have a link to this in the playlist. You have a discussion question on this, and that will give you the timestamp of where to watch. I can't find a YouTube clip that is exactly what we have in the textbook. So just letting you know, go ahead and watch it from the discussion question. Okay, looking at chapter 21, if I can turn to the right page. This is page 357, Gustav Mahler, and the very last chapter in this unit. So Mahler lived from 1860 and died in 1911. He is who we consider the last great Austrian romantic composer. There are other Austrian composers who we consider greats afterwards, but he's the last romantic one, the one who fits in the romantic period. He's usually associated with orchestral music, and his orchestral sound influenced the 20th century composers. Looking at growth and development here. He was born in Bohemia, so that Czech region. His dad was a tavern keeper, so he comes from the middle class. He grew up with a lot of Bohemian peasant songs and dances, as well as marches. He studied piano, and he started to compose even as a young boy. At age 15, he went to the Vienna Conservatory. At age 20, he started to conduct professionally, and at age 28, he became the director of the Budapest Opera. Brahms, huge fan of Mahler, said that he went to listen to Mahler conduct Don Giovanni, and he said it was the only true Don Giovanni. Don Giovanni is notoriously difficult to direct. However, Mahler did not lead like a super charmed life. He did face a little bit of adversity. So at age 37, he wanted to conduct at the Vienna Opera. However, they didn't want to hire him because he was Jewish. Again, this is prior to what we have in the 1900s, the 1940s with the Third Reich and everything. There's a lot of trouble here. So to avoid the stigma of being Jewish, Mahler converted to Catholicism to get the job. And apparently that's all he needed to do. He actually got that job and held it for 10 years. Although he brought Vienna Opera to new heights, a lot of people didn't like him. They viewed him as a tyrant. They thought he had too many roles. Like a lot of conductors, he wanted it his way. And that's probably where the stigma of conductors are very picky comes from with Mahler. A fabulous conductor, nobody denies that, but also very, very picky, probably a little bit OCD with it. So looking at recognition and reception of Mahler and his works. So he's famous for being a conductor. That everybody that was established. Everybody knew that. But he also wanted to be recognized as a composer. There were some mixed feelings about his symphonies. Some people thought it was too dissonant. Some people thought it was too long, too much overall, which is what we kind of get from late romantics. They like to keep going above and beyond what had already happened. So critics thought his music was harsh, super dissonant, elaborate orchestration, which apparently was bad, and confusing shifts in mood. So basically, they didn't get it. You either got it or you didn't. Mahler, who was a workaholic, bless his heart, had to compose during the summer, which was the off season for the opera, and that was the only time he had to compose. The Vienna Opera, he conducted that for most of the year, and that wasn't his only job. He also conducted at the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. So he had a lot of different hats that he had to wear, lots of different jobs. Looking at his legacy, at age 42, he married Alma Schindler, who became Alma Mahler. She was 19 years younger than him. She was also extremely talented, a composer in her own right, and they had 2 daughters. You can read a little bit about their love life in the textbook. And in 1908, this is the year he became the conductor of the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. So he actually goes to America. Here we're finally seeing America kind of play a big role in music. So the year afterwards, he became the director of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Again, lots of jobs. And sadly, again, he was disliked by a lot of his players. They thought he was a tyrant. People disliked his music. Again, they didn't get it. He had a horrible reputation with the socialites. You had to play nice with the socialites because they would support the orchestra, donate money. And he was apparently difficult to get along with, which is kind of sad. Today, we view his music as amazing. People perform Mahler's music all the time, and people love it. But during his lifetime, mixed reception. So his music is often programmatic. There's some kind of meaning to it, and it may reflect his own lifestyle. He was searching for meaning in life. He finished 9 symphonies. He used voices in 4 of the symphonies as a nod to Beethoven. So Beethoven was the first individual to include a choir in a symphony. Mahler's doing something similar here. And we would say his symphonies are absolutely huge. They are his longest one is about 90 minutes. So going from a 25-minute symphony in the classical period to a 90-minute symphony at the end of the Romantic period. That's how big this blew up. He wrote song cycles that featured voice and orchestra. So usually when we think of art song, we would say voice and piano, some kind of accompaniment, but not usually voice and orchestra. That seems totally weird, but Mahler did it. And he influenced a lot of 20th century composers, and we're going to look at these in the next unit, Schoenberg, Webern, and Berg. So the thing that you're going to listen to comes from Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, Songs of a Wayfarer, composed between 1883. I put that twice. Composed in 1883, orchestrated in the 1890s. Anyway, this is one of his first masterpieces. It's a cycle of 4 songs for voice and orchestra. The words and music are by Mahler. The text is autobiographical. It's about scorned love before he met Alma. And it focuses on an alienated wanderer. And that's a common theme when it comes to Germanic Romantic poetry. You get a lot of those kind of scorned lovers who are just wandering through nature, trying to find meaning in life. See, we are going to listen to Ging heute Morgen übers Feld, sorry. This morning I went through the fields. That's what it translates to. This is the second song from that song cycle. It has a folk-like simplicity that he was trying to go for. Again, you're wandering through the fields. You don't want something super heavy. You want something more simplistic. It is in modified strophic form, so many of the verses are following the same melody, but the end one doesn't. And it has orchestral interludes. And you have this in your playlist as well. That's it.